So melatonin, a supplement a lot of people know of and have probably taken in smaller doses orally at night. Let's talk about the benefits and then how to incorporate that with other strategies to sleep our best.
Yeah. So the big overwhelming theme in the book, it's called Melatonin Miracle Molecule. It was the first book I wrote, is high dose melatonin. And I was introduced to these super physiological doses of melatonin from Russell Ryder, who's probably the most researched. Like he's on like over 1,500 research articles. It's insane. And he's in his 80s, and he's been taking a couple hundred milligrams a day, a night for decades, right? And he also says that just about every researcher he knows in the field takes 100 to 2. The 180 milligram is like kind of like about what all the animal models, because life extension, disease mitigation, like let's not even like sleep is just a little piece of melatonin. Melatonin is made by every cell in your body. Every mitochondria makes it to quench oxidation. It's our primary antioxidant system. And it even works in the gut. We're talking about the gut and our doorway. Melatonin is secreted by the lining of your intestines, and it stimulates microbiome swarming. And so your whole microbiome thrives on melatonin. And when it doesn't get that melatonin, the bad bacteria overrides the good bacteria, because you don't thrive, that good bacteria. And they've done studies on everything from ulcerative colitis to Crohn's disease with melatonin. They found just amazing benefits because of this connection to our microbiome, because they're on a circadian rhythm as well. And so that's a signaling, because they're like, okay, part of the day I'm going to like grow and proliferate and swarm. And the other part of the day, I'm going to just kind of lie dormant, right? And so the signaling to that is melatonin. And when you don't have that signaling, you don't have that robust regeneration of those bacteria. And then the melatonin actually inhibits the bad bacteria. So it doesn't allow that. It's really it's just amazing, like how we were built and designed. It's just so perfect. And so then melatonin also has an anti-cancer. One of the cancers that it just has such a massive, powerful inhibition to is anything that's regulated through estrogen. So breast cancer and prostate cancer are like at the top of the list of that. So anybody with either one of those cancers really should look very closely at melatonin as something to slow the growth down, and at part of that plan that they have, unfortunately our medical world is in control of that situation for the most part. And their go-to is chemotherapy and radiation. And many times patients that are diagnosed with cancer will then go to their doctor and say, hey, I heard about melatonin, or I heard about this, or I heard about that. And those doctors have a very strict regime, because the studies that govern that treatment that they're giving you don't include anything else. And so they are going to be completely closed to anything from like fasting, which, this could be amazing, ketogenic diet, melatonin, methylene blue, some of these things, they're just going to say, don't do it because this is the protocol, right? And then that puts the patient in a really messed up position, because they have to either not tell their doctor, go against their doctor. And it's scary, because like they're looking at a life-ending disease. And we work with some patients like that. And it's just, it just sucks, because if you look at the research, it's there. There's countless research that show that when you take melatonin and do radiation therapy, that it doesn't mitigate the negative effects of the radiation, and the patients bounce back, don't have all the negative effects, and it actually enhances the results. But it has not made its way into the medical model, because there's no patent on melatonin. So there's nobody that's motivated to educate people, right? You don't have those cute little cheerleaders that are paid a couple $100,000 a year to go to the doctor's office with their cute little skirt and say, hey, you should use melatonin, right? They're pushing something else. So it's not in the doctor's medical books, because the medical books are our medical schools are mostly funded by pharmaceutical companies. And then they demand that inside the books, the textbooks, when you research certain diseases like a stomach disease, that you use Prilosec, an acid blocker in the stomach, right? They don't learn that H. pylori is the most common cause, which is a stomach infection, of heartburn, and that it's too little acid in the stomach that's causing the heartburn, because we're not able to properly break down the food and trigger the release of the sphincter on the bottom of the stomach to release the food content to then dump bicarb, which is an alkalizing. So the pancreas, in that response to that high acid, dumps baking soda basically to neutralize all that acid, so that material going into the small intestine is not acidic. So literally, when you take acid blockers, you're actually creating an acid material that's then going to destroy the lower part of the gut and cause all these other problems. And it's such a backward education, but it's fueled by finances. It's fueled by big pharma and how they want to push these doctors into prescribing these medicines. It's crazy. They're not learning root cause. They're not learning about what's really causing the disease, because curing diseases it's not profitable. People aren't taking something every day over longer periods of time, which create tremendous profits for the medicines. And so then the researchers and the pharmaceutical companies that are starting to look around to say, okay, let's find the new drug that we can make money off of. And so, this molecule, you can take this a few times and it's going to cure this disease. Well, let's hide that. We don't want people to know that. But this one is going to have a temporary effect, and then have to take it every day, 3 times a day, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is the one I want to spend $1 billion to take it through the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials, get it approved. And then we're going to make a lot of money off of this once it gets to market. And when you start to really look at this logically, it's scary, but it's reality.
All right, coming back to melatonin as a whole, it's a hugely important molecule. And when I brought it up, I wasn't meaning that it was just for sleep. That's just what traditionally people look at it as, a molecule that can help them sleep. And I do believe, even with the way you supplement with it, it is an input best used at night. And unlike methylene blue, it's best taken rectally, because orally, you're not going to absorb very much. So talk about that.
Yeah, studies show orally it's about 2.5% absorbed. And so we manufacture some suppositories called Sandman. And we also have an oral version, kind of like the methylene blue, which is like a bar. And this one's a little different because we have a fairly high dose of CBN, which is a cannabinoid that's just wonderful for sleep. You've got CBD, CBG, and CBN. And they're cannabinoids that all kind of have these different beneficial aspects. And you really want a full spectrum, right? So they have cannabis plants that they grow that are really high in one of those cannabinoids. But I found CBN to just be great for sleep. So we combine that with the oral version. The suppository, we put glutathione with it, because glutathione is actually one of the sleep promoting substances. And that can be really, really beneficial for detox and just for inflammation, for autoimmune, for allergies, for enhancing the brain. So we also have magnolia and linalool, which from lavender. So we've kind of blended it with some things that are synergistic for sleep. We have a 200 milligram and we have a 400 milligrams. So it's Sandman and Super Sandman. And suppositories release slowly over many hours. And so that slow release allows our something called peak plasma, which is where it's available in our bloodstream, so that our cells can pull it up and our body can absorb it. Where when we take things like in an injection or even orally, oftentimes peak plasma is only like an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And so even though it might be higher in the blood, the cells can only absorb at a certain rate. So it's still like trying to bring in as much as it can. So you can get a lot more absorption if it's a slow release over a long peak plasma period, which suppositories can be 5 to 7 hours. Plus, it's going to maintain that melatonin for that, like what it's normally pulsed in the body over that sleep cycle. And even time released melatonin, which you want to stay away from. Those are all the quality of the melatonin is compromised, and they don't really work very well. The slow released melatonins, um, but yeah. So there, also we manufacture an NAD suppository. A lot of people are into NAD for mitochondrial and anti-aging purposes, and that actually is a much, in my opinion, a much better way than going and sitting at an IV center for 3 to 5 hours and paying $1,000 to $1,500 for. So yeah, rectal absorption. There's a lot of substances. Glutathione absorbs very poorly orally. A lot of polyphenols, like curcumin, quercetin, stearostilbene, which is really wonderful for fasting and autophagy and inflammation. Those all absorb very poorly orally, so we put a lot of those in our mixtures. So yeah, I mean, it's not a big deal. I mean, some people kind of think, I'm not gonna put some in my butt, especially like some men, like, oh no, but it's like 2 seconds. Like you don't even know it's there. It's like this tiny little kind of bullet shaped thing. It goes in right, it kind of, once you get it like right at a certain point, it just kind of pulls up into that lower part of your colon. You don't even feel it. You wash your hands, you're done, and you're off, and you're like, it's like you're walking around hooked up to an IV. And so if you're somebody dealing with some significant diseases, like this can be life changing for you, and you really can feel the difference with this absorption method. And so some people are just forced to experiment and be more open to suppositories. They kind of get pushed into that through just the need because they're just so sick. And other people like biohackers, and they're like, hey, I'm adventurous. I'm willing to try things that are like not common because I really want to maximize my physiology. I want to feel my best. I want to be at my best with my business and my relationships and my purpose and my mission in my life. And they're like pushed to do things a little bit more than what normally people would do. And those are the people that seem to gravitate to these products.
When we talked about methylene blue, we got into the fact that it's good to cycle that periodically. A product like Sandman, either the 200 or 400 milligrams, is that something you're taking nightly, or do you take breaks?
So melatonin, kind of like methylene blue, they're actually really powerful together, and they work on the mitochondria in different ways and very synergistic, right? So methylene blue kind of gets into the mitochondria and like lubricates the energy. It enhances it about 30%, right? So you've got that more capacity. But we talked about how methylene blue can be antimicrobial, right? Where melatonin, it gets in the mitochondria, and because it quenches oxidation, it raises this. So there's something called hormesis, right? So there's a hormetic window, right? And basically what this means is that we have like a threshold of stress that we can tolerate, and a little bit of stress. So this window, this what they call the hormetic window, within this window, we get a gain in health because it's stress that activates adaptation responses in the body that make us stronger. Like gravity activates us to produce more bone and get thicker tendons, and like we need gravity to have a stronger physical body, right? Fasting is another stress, right? So when we fast, our body goes into stress. Sun can be a stress, right? Because the skin is under stress from the sun. When we take melatonin, we can tolerate much more stress before we reach that top end of the hormetic window where we get into what's called the danger zone, where the cell no longer can adapt to stress. And this is where disease can really start to come into place. But infections kind of have the same thing. So we have a certain amount of infection that we can tolerate before the body shuts down and we get into a real danger situation. Like it's called the cytokine storm with I mean, they were talking about a lot of that with COVID, like, oh, the cytokine storm. And then we have like, respirators and death and blah, blah, blah. So melatonin was one of the primary treatments for COVID until, they really started to push. They had to get rid of any other treatment options for COVID because if they couldn't maintain their emergency access to the vaccine, so that they didn't have to have all of their clinical trials and researches to prove they had that the law says there has to be no other alternative, right? But yet your country did a really cool study on melatonin. It was like 40 to 60 milligrams a night. And they actually found 54% less transmission with COVID. Like it was like protecting people from even catching it, which you didn't get with the vaccine. And the other thing is they did research with melatonin with viruses that were just as lethal as COVID, if not more. And they found survival rates literally went from 94%. I'm sorry, survival rate of 6%. So 96%, 94% of the animals in this study died. They gave them melatonin and then they redid this study and they found that it was almost opposite, where they had like an 80 something percent survival rate with melatonin on board, because it allowed that cytokine storm to not be as threatening to the system, because the system could like maintain its energy levels to fuel the immune system to keep working and not shut down, because it's that hormetic window. It's really, really fascinating. And so when you combine methylene blue and melatonin together, you have this like really powerful synergistic aspect to. One aspect is like human performance, right? Which we can talk about that with athletes and just, executives and biohacking and stuff like that. But then when we have a disease or an infection, we can start looking at higher doses of these substances to deal with that. And so you've got this stuff in your medicine cabinet, and it's like if you get sick, you might want to take the Super Sandman instead of the Sandman. You might even want to take up to a gram of melatonin. And there's no toxicity to melatonin, and there's no negative feedback loop. So we don't stop our own production ever. Like you could take hundreds of milligrams of melatonin every day for years and then stop. And the next day you will produce the same amount of melatonin through your pineal for your circadian rhythm that you would otherwise, because it's a completely independent system that's based on light that goes into your eyes. And that's why you don't want to wear sunglasses all the time. You want to get out in the sun, because you're going to build pineal melatonin that way.
So are you taking breaks, or are you having one of these suppositories every night?
I only take breaks when I forget, or I'm in a situation where I'm traveling or I'm staying somewhere and I forgot my stuff, but it's never intentionally. I prefer to take it every night if I have access to it. And I'm 54 years old, right? I mean, I got to tell you, 10 years ago, I looked older than this. My skin, I went through 10 years of severe Lyme and mold illness, which I almost killed me. And I mean, I looked like I was 80 years old at one time. And it was a few years after that I got turned on to high dose melatonin, but it's been just an amazing journey. I put it on my skin. We make a melatonin cream called Mitoskin. I put it on my face every night and every morning. I take it orally. It's absolutely a miracle molecule, and there's no, in the same situation with methylene blue, I just don't see any downside to it. And, we probably wouldn't have to do these things, except in this modern world, there's just too many stressors. And I think that we need to adapt as a species to these stressors by mitigating them with something. And I believe these two molecules are at the top of my list.
Okay, so for melatonin, you mentioned the two different supplements you make, 200 milligrams, 400 milligrams. How does that compare to something somebody would go pick up at, say, a health food store that they would take orally at night, dosage wise?
Yeah. Well, um,
we know it's not going to absorb as well orally, but just to get an idea of the spectrum of dosages.
Well, yeah. I mean, some experts will say, they're totally against melatonin, and they feel like it's dangerous. And it blows my mind that these people are, and sometimes it's all about, well, because of sleep and this and that and the other, or you don't want to monkey with the system. Like Peter Attia, who I respect. I mean, he's got some great content, but he's one of the people that Andrew Huberman also very down on melatonin, and their whole conversation is based on sleep, and they're like Andrew Huberman talks about a hamster study that their gonads basically shrunk when they took melatonin, right? And so that study is a Siberian hamster, and Siberian hamsters have a breeding cycle that's based on the length of the day, right? And so the longer days, they're more active. They're not breeding as much, right? We're during the winter months, where shorter days, they're more breeding, right? And so there's going to be less melatonin because they're not subjected to as much light. And so they're built for these gonads to shrink and grow back, right? We don't have that mechanism. There's never been a study, not one, that shows any negative effect to hormones. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I have a chapter in my book all dedicated to hormones, and for everything from fertility. It improves your hormones. It supports your glands. It's quite the opposite. And it's really unfortunate that this conversation is just quenched, and he keeps on. I mean, I see it on social media, and they have companies that sell like a sleep substance. Ditch your melatonin, and like, this is the best sleep. And they're totally ignoring like all of these benefits of melatonin. And after the age of 40, melatonin just drops off the chart. Like, it goes like, especially like when you get to 60s, you get like nothing. And so I don't think that there's one better anti-aging, life enhancing substance you could do, or biohacking thing that you could do, than supplementing with melatonin.
For a practitioner that's open to melatonin, but they're conventional minded on dosage, what would a conventional dose be though? Would it be under 10 milligrams?
They're basically filtering through sleep. And so they're looking like, what is the minimal dose that people, and you can take. It's really homeopathy, and homeopathy is powerful, right? But if you take 2 or 3 milligrams and you're only absorbing 2.5%, it's such a tiny, tiny amount. But that's plenty enough. It induces sleep. People, they go to sleep. And so oftentimes these people are looking at the minimal effective dose, because their thoughts are that the higher the dose, the more it's monkeying with the system, and it might be dangerous. But they're not really stratifying and looking at the. So Garrett McNamara is calling me. I didn't know my phone was on. Have you seen 100-Foot Wave on HBO?
I've seen you talk about it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. So Garrett and I are doing an event in Nazaré in February. It's called Breath and Biohacking. We're going to do one portion of it here in Sarasota, and we're teaming up with Stig Severson, who has got the breath holding record. He's got a documentary called 22. And so I'm going to be working on human performance. Stig is going to be like teaching people breath breathing and breath holding and safety. And Garrett is going to be teaching people about surfing and like addressing your 100-foot wave, and the psychology and the spirituality behind that. So we're going to have a section here in Sarasota, and then we're going to go to Nazaré, and we've got about 20 spots where people can literally be personally coached by the three of us. Because I did this last year, and he pulled me into a 40-foot wave, and it was such a bucket list. So anybody out there that's a surfer, reach out to me. about the potential to get involved. Maybe you ought to come down for it. It's going to be unbelievable. Breath and biohacking.
That sounds amazing. When is it?
February. February 17th, 18th is going to be here in Sarasota. And then the 25th, 6th, and 7th is going to be in Nazaré, Portugal.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
I don't think that there's one better anti-aging, life-enhancing substance or biohacking thing that you could do than supplementing with melatonin. Sleep is just a little piece of melatonin. Melatonin is made